Hi all of you. So continuing with our lectures on anatomy, today I'm going to discuss with you a very confusing, but I would say important. It's not a very important thing, but if you don't understand this, you won't be able to answer anything about it. Okay, even if a question comes. So it's going to give you an additional advantage over others who is just studying dental pulse. Okay, or any other guide. Okay, just not dental pulse, any guide. So cervical and brachial plexus. If I go directly into cervical and brachial plexus, you won't understand anything. So I'm going to give you some very basics and advance into the cervical and brachial plexus, and then come on to the additional areas which I'll be discussing. Okay, first I'll give you an outline what I'm going to discuss now. So I'm going to discuss with you spinal nerve. Okay, spinal nerve. From there, you know it now. There is a ventral root. There's a dorsal root. Okay, there's a ventral root and a dorsal root. Related to the ventral root, we have got something known as cervical sympathetic trunk. You studied it associated with various structures now. Okay, cervical sympathetic trunk and ganglia. Carotid sheath, remember, we studied deep cervical fascia. So that's, I'm going to discuss a little detail in the end. We're going to discuss associated with ventral root as cervical plexus. And as again associated with the ventral root, we have got a brachial plexus. Okay, brachial plexus. Now, associated with cervical plexus. Okay, I'll describe cervical plexus in detail. I'll show you diagram, but some important structures and some comparison between brachial plexus and cervical plexus. Cervical plexus has got a nerve called lesser occipital, greater auricular, and phrenic nerve. Very three important structures. You come across this again and again. Lesser occipital, greater auricular, phrenic nerve, and so on. Okay. Then you've got radial nerve associated with brachial plexus. You know it. Okay, on your limbs. Okay, and median nerve, ulnar nerve. I'm sure many of you have come across this. Now, what does it mean? Brachial plexus, if it's associated with these nerves, it supplies what? Upper limb, isn't it? Then, when you come on to the dorsal root, you have got the suboccipital. So remember, lesser occipital is there here. Okay, it's there in the cervical plexus. Suboccipital is here. Okay, that's important to note. So suboccipital you come across again, don't be confused. So dorsal root, there is suboccipital nerve. There is greater occipital. So again, greater auricular, greater occipital, two comparisons. Okay, then third occipital. So that means dorsal root has got suboccipital, greater occipital, and third occipital. And whereas on the cervical plexus, we have got lesser occipital, greater auricular, phrenic nerve, which supplies the diaphragm. I'm sure you would have come across, if you have solved anatomy, you would have come across the phrenic nerve. So this is the outline. Okay, this is the outline I just want to give you now. A little bit more. Cervical plexus supplies head and neck region. Okay, cervical plexus supplies head and neck region. Where exactly in the head and neck, I'll tell you. Whereas, if you come across the brachial plexus, it supplies the limbs. And dorsal root, again, head and neck region. So once again, the cervical plexus is supplying the head and neck region. Okay, as well as the dorsal root. Okay, so what does it mean? The ventral root gives rise to cervical plexus, which supplies the head and neck. Okay, and the dorsal root in itself supplies the head and neck. And again, the brachial plexus, which is coming from the ventral root, is supplying the limbs, upper limbs to be specific. Okay, so that's an outline. Now let us go into the first part, which is spinal nerves, understanding spinal nerves in little detail. Okay, now coming on to spinal nerves, you know that it arises from the spinal cord. Okay, and there are 31 pairs of spinal nerves. You know, there is the cranial nerves and spinal nerves, isn't it? So now spinal nerves are 31 pairs. If you divide them, you have got 8 cervical on cervical region, so it depends upon the body parts. Then there are 12 thoracic in the thoracic segment. Okay, then lumbar, 5 lumbar. You know this, it's a very basic, 5 sacral and 1 coccygeal, isn't it? 1 coccygeal. Now, what you need to know is how the nerve is formed. Okay, how the cervical nerve is formed. Now, if you see a section of spinal cord, you will see a dorsal horn on this side. There is, so just write it as D on this side, and a ventral horn, H-O-R-N, horn on that side, and a lateral horn on the either side. So that's the lateral horn. Okay. Now we're going to study about the dorsal and ventral, and later on when we discuss the sympathetic trunk and ganglia, we'll understand more about the lateral horns. Okay. So note it down there. Draw this and note it down. The dorsal horn is sensory. Okay. Dorsal horn is sensory, and ventral horn is motor. Okay. Now if you go a little further, you will see two roots. Okay, that was horn. Two roots coming on the one on the dorsal side and on the one on the ventral side. The dorsal root is sensory again, okay, and ventral root is motor. So two roots are emerging from the two sides. So it's paired, so it's there on this side also, it will be there on this side also, but we are taking one side, okay. So there is dorsal root and ventral root. Then going further, you've got a ganglia from the dorsal root, remember. Okay, wait, you'll understand further. There is a ventral root, there is also a ganglia, which we'll understand later. As of now, just understand there is a dorsal root ganglia, which is again sensory. It contains the cell bodies of sensory neurons. Okay, you know that ganglia means it's cell bodies, collection of cell bodies. Okay, and this is what dorsal root ganglia. From there, they're going to converge and you're going to get the spinal nerves. This blue structure is what is a spinal nerve trunk, or you can call it a spinal nerve. So what all did you get? We've got a dorsal root, a ventral root, they both join together and we got a spinal nerve. Okay, so this is a structure which you have to understand. Now from the spinal nerve trunk, we are going to see further two other structures, dorsal ramus, okay, and ventral ramus. Okay, now this is again horn here, okay, root, ramus, okay, don't mistake. Now here the concept is that horns always contain either motor or sensory. That means dorsal root is dorsal horn is sensory, ventral horn is motor. Again coming on to the root, they are also the either sensory or motor, like here, sensory or motor. Now, when it comes to the ramus, remember that there is a mixing, isn't it? There is a mixing. How is the mixing? The one comes here and goes, okay, goes into this side also, isn't it? Again, the one comes from the other side, you remember it? Goes into this side also, this side also. So it's kind of a mixed. When it comes to the ramus, it gets mixed up. Okay, the ramus is mixed up. So this is the structure which you have to know. Okay, so that is, as I've told you, dorsal ramus and ventral ramus has got both sensory and motor components. Whereas when you come on to the horns, it has got either sensory or motor. Dorsal roots again sensory or motor. When it comes to ramus, this contains the both sensory and motor. Now, as I've told you, dorsal root ganglia is sensory, the cell bodies of sensory neurons. Now coming on to this image, you will see again, you can see the dorsal root coming, isn't it? There is a dorsal root ganglia here. Now here is the ventral root coming, it goes as a ventral ramus, okay? And the dorsal root coming here, it just goes here, has got ganglia and it's much smaller, isn't it? Dorsal ramus, okay? Ramus and ganglia, understandable, isn't it? So this is the basic structure which I have explained. This is the section of spinal cord. Okay, when you view it from the front, okay, you could see this structure out there. Now coming on to the cervical plexus. Okay, we have come to the topic of interest now.